Current response to the left. This analysis stands for the proposition that there is no organized, coherent response to the left. This leaves the nation vulnerable at a time when the left is openly escalating its rhetoric in anticipation of violence, in the face of an opposition that lacks the situational awareness to accurately articulate those same events. Not only does America lack a strategic response, as Krapinovich and Watts observed, American political elites fail, quote, to understand what strategy is, unquote, and has a, quote, disinclination to view strategy as important, unquote. The very idea that national-level leaders have lost the capacity and interest to think strategically should itself be considered a successful outcome. The lack of a strategy, in fact the inability to even think strategically, facilitates the left's scheme of maneuver in the information domain as the population conforms to the narratives the left sets for it. This includes the opposition, including the quote-unquote conservative opposition. The lack of strategic awareness renders mainstream thinkers and conservatives strategically incoherent and dangerously so. In these circumstances, responses to the left's information efforts will be reactive and tactical, incapable of accounting for the strategic design they do not perceive. As Sun Tzu warned, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Current end state. Because this analysis concludes that since there is no discernible strategic articulation of the left, there is an aversion to even discussing the left in terms of the dialectically determined Marxism that it is, and there remains a disinclination to think strategically among those most responsible for doing so, that there can be no strategy as the situation currently exists. This is a vulnerability. While efforts to oppose the left may secure derivative operational and tactical victories, with no ability to convert them to strategic successes, those victories can only be fleeting, if not illusory, and will, most likely, play out in ways that position the targeted issue for future negation. With no understanding of the ends, ways, and means by which to arrest America's slow but certain drift to the left, even conservatives are left flailing at the tactical manifestations of strategies dictated by the left, because they have no appreciation for those strategies outside of their tactical manifestations. This owes heavily to the fact that there remains an inability to appreciate the role of narratives in establishing mass-line movements used for powering down into political decision-making domains. Failing to understand how mass-line narratives influence the words that work for establishment Republicans when formulating policy, they appear to have no appreciation for how those narratives transform them into the left's designated defeat mechanism. Conservatives likewise fail to recognize the role mass-line narratives play in controlling their perception of events. Conclusion. The language used to communicate the left today is peculiarly archaic, incapable of recognizing its true nature, and so dangerously under-inclusive to a proper understanding of its strategic design as to classify the environment it sustains as a pseudo-reality. The left cannot be understood outside the dialectical materialist core that defines it. The dialectic comes from Hegel, the materialism from Marx. The two cannot be disassociated from each other or from the left. From Hegel comes the dialectical engines of negation that drive the left, including its otherism campaigns, a statism that invests the state with godlike rights conferring authority that includes a complete claim of right on its subjects, and a concept of scientism that supports unscientific claims of metaphysical certitude for whatever worldview is advanced, such that the opposition can be characterized as unscientific, ill-informed, questionably motivated, and most importantly, of being on the losing side of an inevitable history. Whether classified as the euphoria the left praises or the delusional will to power that its opponents claim, there is general recognition that the dialectic brings a mood-altering, thought process-changing transformation typically associated with intense ideological conviction or religious zeal. As far back as Marx, there is the recognition that Hegel's dialectic does not advance cultures under its sway, but rather nihilizes them. From this recognition, Marx called for a critical philosophy to tear down Western culture and a proletariat of middle-class nihilists to do so. From Marx to Alinsky, one does not have to be religious to recognize the dark, destructive nihilist strain that runs through the left, as characterized by numerous homages to Satan et al. Today, Marx's philosophical criticism manifests itself as the Frankfurt School's critical theory, which Herbert Marcuse's repressive tolerance operationalized as one of the most prominent manifestations of it in America today. Seeking to fully integrate into the left's larger effort, Marcuse put his critical theory construct at the service of the larger Marxist push when adopting Mao's Long March strategy as the execution formula of choice. Mao's Long March strategy is the mass-line counterstate political warfare strategy. From the critical theory of the Frankfurt School to the United Front efforts of the Soviet-led Comintern that, in the 1930s, formed Antifa, interfaith penetration, the precursor to Black Lives Matter, and more, every aspect of the left that America confronts today can not only be immediately associated with Marxist-inspired programs, they can further be placed in a context that recognizes them to be the foreseeable progressions of the left's historic mission. The current state of conventional analysis on the left is marooned in a pseudo-reality sustained by the archaic political language already identified. As such, strategic awareness of the left has been forgotten, and current constructions are intensely reactive, localized, and tactical. They are under-inclusively defective, and dangerously so. To re-remember the misremembered left, this analysis adopts the political warfare model used by Mao to implement Marxism in his successful Long March effort to control China. The Maoist insurgency model also happens to be the execution strategy American Marxists like Marcuse publicly adopted as their strategy in the early 1970s. Political warfare recognizes the role narratives play in overwhelming a rule of law society. This includes the formation of mass-line movements and counterstate activities that utilize narratives at the cultural level, with the objective of powering down into the political space, where fidelity to the narrative will result in non-enforcement of law that, over time, will become institutionalized. It is through the process of imposing narratives that the opposition first becomes influenced and then controlled, becoming a controlled opposition. Abuse of language leads to an abuse of power. Political warfare strategies are intensely dialectical, seeking the isolation of American values that are then negated through a relentless process of dialectical negation, Aufhebender Kultur. It is the conclusion of this analysis that current opposition to the left, from mainstream and conservatives alike, is not just out of position to be able to mount a strategic response. It is precisely in the position the left placed it in order to play the role scripted for it. As such, it is the recommendation of this analysis that a group be immediately formed and resourced to fully develop the left's scheme of operation for the purpose of developing responses that recognize the necessity of executing strategic, operational, and tactical level responses. In this context, countering the left minimally includes responses directed at the dialectical engines, the inherent statism, the scientism, the information dominance sustained by narratives, all of which would be executed through those same political warfare lines of effort as counter mass line efforts. This is a currently existing existential threat As President Obama made clear, the left is within 10 to 20 years of realizing the fruits of its long march in America. A final recommendation: take the red pill now. The question is not whether it will be taken, but rather at what level of pain. Quote, "We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare. It's fragile. It needs protection." Unquote. Ronald Reagan farewell speech, January 11, 1989. Appendices to report. Appendix A. Bertrand Russell cracks the complexity code, or how Bertrand Russell's explanation of the Hegelian demand to understand particulars exclusively in the context of the whole exposes the imposed incoherence of complexity theory in the national security analytical workspace. Includes an excerpt from Catastrophic Failure, Blindfolding America in the Face of Jihad by Stephen Coughlin. Appendix B. Unpacking Pre-Reflective Thought, the Hermeticism in Hegel. Appendix C. Organizations mentioned in the paper. Appendix D. Recommended reading. Appendix E. The left operates dialectically, through time, along an arc. Failure to account for this is error. Analyzing the left as if Hegel and Marx were simply providing interesting historical context to today's events means failing to understand that for the left, Marx was yesterday and Hegel the day before. Between the two, they are the source code, the operational DNA of today's left. Appendix E is the December 18, 2018 Daily Caller article by Andrew Kerr. Quote, revealed, Antifa leader relied on anonymity to push radical, violent communist agenda, unquote, which includes the associated Twitter communications. The article is about Joseph Alcoff, a person who supports congressional Democrats, is a community organizer, and an Antifa terrorist who openly calls for targeted violent direct action. He is a Marxist. And yet, even with all the public and historical data available, including public disclosures that document the regular, seamless transition of individual actors from nonviolent Alinskyist organizers to violent Antifa terrorists based on function and not any quote-unquote radicalization process. The U.S. Army has determined that Antifa poses no serious threat. Appendix E is provided to demonstrate that everything discussed in this analysis is imminently present in today's left, such that failure to account for it constitutes, by itself, a clear and present danger. Appendix D. Recommended reading. Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals, Random House, New York, 1971. Alessandro de Alia, Marxism and Psychoanalysis, Notes on Wilhelm Reich's Life and Works, Marxism.com, 15 October 2004. Monia Baker, Over half of psychological studies fail reproducibility test, Nature, August 27, 2015. Hans Urs von Balthasar, Part 3, The Word and Silence, Word and Revelation, Herder and Herder, New York, 1964. Karl Barth, Protestant Thought, From Rousseau to Ritschl, translation Brian Cozens, Simon & Schuster, New York, 1969. Edward Bernays, Propaganda, originally published 1928, IG Publishing, Brooklyn, 2004. Yuri Bezmenov, Deception Was My Job, G. Edward Griffin's 1984 interview, Soviet Subversion of the Free World Press, YouTube. Whittaker Chambers, Witness, Regnery History, New York, 1952. Marquis de Sade, Juliet, original French, 1797, Grove Press, 1994. Marquis de Sade, Justine, or The Misfortunes of Virtue, original French, 1791, translated by John Phillips, Oxford World's Classics, Oxford University Press, 2013. Belladod Testimony to House Committee on Un-American Activities, Columbus, Ohio, June 17 and 18, 1953, USPO. Belladod Testimony to House Committee on Un-American Activities, Philadelphia, PA, November 16, 1953, USPO. Belladod, School of Darkness, The Devon Adair Company, 1954. Fyodor Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, translation by Constance Garnett, P.F. Collier and Sons, New York, 1917, original Russian, 1866. Rudy Dushki, On Anti-Authoritarianism, The New Left Reader, Carl Oglesby. Editor, translation, Salvatore Adanasio, Grove Press, New York, 1969. Jonathan Freeland, Eugenics, The Skeleton That Rattles Loudest in the Left's Closet. The Guardian, February 17, 2012. Friedrich August von Hayek, The Road to Serfdom, originally published 1944, Routledge Classic, New York, 2001. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, The Philosophy of History, with prefaces by Charles Hegel and the translator, 1840. J. Sibrey, Batoche Books, Kitchener, 2001. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Philosophy of Right, The State, Third Part, Ethical Life, 1821, as quoted by the Marxist Internet Archive. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Philosophy of Right, The State, Third Part, Ethical Life, 1821, as quoted from the Marxist Internet Archive. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Elementary Physics, 2, Inorganic Physics, Philosophy of Nature, 1842, Marxist Internet Archive. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, System of Science, First Part, The Phenomenology of Spirit, Bamberg and Würzburg, 1807, translation, Terry Pinkard, 2010, updated 2013, Marxist Internet Archive. Dietrich von Hildebrand, Teilhard de Chardin, A False Prophet, From Trojan Horse in the City of God, Franciscan Herald Press, Chicago, 1967, Sophia Institute Press, Manchester, New Hampshire, 1993. Eric Hoffer, The True Believer, Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movements, HarperCollins, New York, 1951. Max Horkheimer and Theodore W. Adorno, Excursus to Juliet or Enlightenment and Morality, The Dialectic of Enlightenment, Philosophical Fragments, first published 1944 and revised in 1947, Stanford University Press, Stanford, 2002. Max Horkheimer, TV 1969 interview, Part 1, Founding Member, Frankfurt School and Critical Theory. Max Horkheimer, TV 1969 interview, Part 2, On Destruction of the West and Herbert Marcuse. Aldous Huxley, Ends and Means, Jado and Windus, London, 1937. Martin J., The Dialectical Imagination, History of the Frankfurt School and the Institute for Social Research, 1923 to 1950, Heinemann, London, 1973. Manning Johnson, Testimony of Manning Johnson, Testimony to the House Committee on Un-American Activities Executive Sessions, July 8, 13 and 14, 1953, USPO. Richard N. Coudenhove Kalergi, Pan-Europa Verlag, Vienna, 1923. R. N. Coudenhove Kalergi, Praktischer Idealismus, Pan-Europa Verlag, Wien, Leipzig, 1923. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, The Attitude of the Workers' Party to Religion, Proletary, No. 45, May 13, 26, 1909, from Lenin Collected Works, Progress Publishers, 1973, Moscow, Volume 15. Norman Levine, Wilhelm Reich, Culture as Power, History of European Ideas, Volume 5, No. 3, 1984. Colonel Xiao Liang, Colonel Wang Shengsi, Unrestricted Warfare, China's Master Plan to Destroy America, Pan American Publishing, Panama City, Panama, 2002, originally published in 1999 by China's People's Liberation Army, China, 1999. Robert J. Lifton, M.D., Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a Study of Brainwashing in China, originally published by W. W. Norton & Co., 1961, republished by the University of North Carolina Press, 1989, Kindle version. George Lukács, History and Class Consciousness, studied in Marxist dialectics, 1920 to 1923, translated by Rodney Livingstone, MIT Press, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 1971. George Lukács, Mon chemin vers Marx, 1969, Nouvelles études hongroises, Budapest, 1973, Volume 8, 78-9, as cited in Michael Lowy, George Lukács, From Romanticism to Bolshevism, translated by Patrick Kamler, NLB, 1979. George Lukács, The Old Culture and the New Culture, Telos, 1920. George Lukács, The Ontology of Social Being, 1, Hegel's False and His Genuine Ontology, 1971, translated by David Fernbach, Merlin Press, London, 1978. George Lukács, Tactics and Ethics, The Questions of Parliamentarians and Other Essays, 1919 to 1929, New Left Books, 1962, Verso, New York, 2014. George Lukács, The Theory of the Novel, MIT Press, 1977, first published Berlin, 1920. Glenn Alexander Meiji, Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition, Cornell University Press, Ithaca, 2008. Herbert Marcuse, Eros and Civilization, A Philosophical Inquiry into Freud, Beacon Press, Boston, Kindle edition, 1955. Herbert Marcuse, Marxism, Revolution, and Utopia, Collected Papers of Herbert Marcuse, Volume 6, Routledge, 2017. Herbert Marcuse, On the Affirmative Character of Culture, Culture and Society, Surkamp, Frankfurt am Main, 1937. Herbert Marcuse, Repressive Tolerance, 81 through 123, and Robert Paul Wolff, Barrington Moore, Jr., Herbert Marcuse, A Critique of Pure Tolerance, Beacon Press, Boston, 1965, 1969 printing with 1968 postscript. Hypertext link to HTML version link posted at marcuse.org. John Marini and Ken Masugi, The Progressive Revolution in Politics and Political Science, Transforming the Political Regime, Rowman and Littlefield Publishers, 2005, 233. Jacques Maritain, The Peasant of the Garonne. An old layman questions himself about the present time. Old Reinhardt and Winston, New York, 1966. Thomas A. Mark's treatment of the Maoist model as discussed in Maoist People's War in Post-Vietnam Asia, Bangkok, Thailand, White Lotus Press, Bangkok, Thailand, 2007. Karl Marx, A Contribution to the Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right, Introduction, December 1843 to January 1844. Deutsch-Französische Jahrbuch, February 1844 in Paris, the Marxist Internet Archive. Karl Marx, Capital, A Critique of Political Economy, Friedrich Engels, Modern Library, first published 1906. Karl Marx, Letter from Marx to Arnold Rouge in Dresden, September 1843, published Deutsch-Französische Jahrbuch, 1844, from the Marxist Internet Archive. The Marxist Internet Archive, undated. Emmett McGuirty, Jane Robbins, and Aaron Tuttle, Deconstructing the Administrative State, American Principles Project Foundation, Washington, D.C., 2017. Sergei Nikhaev, The Revolutionary Catechism, 1869, Marxist Internet Archives. James O'Keefe, American Pravda, St. Martin's Press, New York, 2018. Ronald Pistrito, Woodrow Wilson, The Essential Political Writings, Lexington Books, first paperback edition, July 2005. Joseph Pieper, Abuse of Language, Abuse of Power, Ignatius Press, 1992, translation Lothar Krauth, published in German, Kozel Verlag, Munich, 1974. Donatella Della Porta, Social Movements, Political Violence and the State, Cambridge University Press, Cambridge, UK, 1995. Wilhelm Reich, Listen, Little Man, Farrar, Straus, and Giraud, 1974. Wilhelm Reich, The Passion of Youth, an Autobiography, 1897 to 1922. Farrar, Straus, Giraud, New York, 1988. Bertrand Russell, Hegel, History of Western Philosophy and its Connection with Political and Social Circumstances from the Earliest Times to the Present Day. George Allen and Unwin, London, 1947, 757 to 773. Christopher Richard Wade Detteling, editor, The Philosophy of Hegel. Bertrand Arthur William Russell, Internet Archive, 2016. Bertrand Russell, Unpopular Essays, George Allen and Unwin, London, 1921, Internet Archives. Arthur Schopenhauer, On the Basis of Morality, Hackett Publishing Company, from the original German, written in 1840, Indianapolis. Muhammad Shafiq and Muhammad Abu Nimer, Interfaith Dialogue, A Guide for Muslims, International Institute of Islamic Thought, IIIT, Herndon, Virginia, 2007, second printing, 2011, London. Myron Sharaf, Fury on Earth, a biography of Wilhelm Reich, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1983. Les Atomes de l'Âme, 2011. George Bernard Shaw, The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism, 1928. Brentano's Publishers, New York, 1928. George Bernard Shaw, Lecture to the Eugenics Education Society, The Daily Express, March 4, 1910. George Bernard Shaw, Speech, Sir or Madam, Now Will You Be Kind Enough to Justify Your Existence? YouTube, September 27, 2010. Adam Schrager and Rob Whitwer, The Blueprint, How the Democrats Won Colorado, and Why Republicans Everywhere Should Care. Speaker's Corner, Fulcrum Publishing, Kindle Edition, 2010, Kindle Books. Dr. Wolfgang Smith in Teilhardism and the New Religion, a thorough analysis of the teachings of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Tan Books, Charlotte, North Carolina, 1988. Lloyd Spencer and Andre Krauss, Hegel for Beginners, Icon Books, 1996. Marxist Internet Archive. Kimberly Strassel, The Intimidation Game, How the Left is Silencing Free Speech. Hatchet Book Group, New York, 2016. Ralph de Toledano, Cry Havoc, The Great American Breakdown and How It Happened. Anthem Books, Washington, D.C., 2006. Eric Vogelin, On Hegel, A Study in Sorcery, The Study of Time. Springer Verlag, Berlin, New York, 1972. Eric Vogelin, The New Science of Politics, Walgreen Foundation Lectures, 1952, University of Chicago Press. Eric Vogelin, Response to Professor Altizer's A New History and a New but Ancient God, The Collected Works of Eric Vogelin, Volume 12, Published Essays, 1966 to 1985, Edition Elisandos, Louisiana State University Press, Baton Rouge, 1990, 292 to 303. Eric Ritter, von Colonel-Ledeen, Leftism Revisited, From de Sade and Marx to Hitler and Pol Pot, Gateway Books, 1991. Liberty or Equality, The Challenge of Our Times, Ludwig von Mises Institute, 2014. Menace of the Herd or Procrustes at Large, Ludwig von Mises Institute, 2012. H.G. Wells, The New World Order, Secker and Warburg, London, 1940. H.G. Wells, Anticipations of the Reaction of Mechanical and Scientific Progress upon Human Life and Thought. Chapman and Hall, London, 1902. H. G. Wells, Anticipations of the Reaction of Mechanical and Scientific Progress upon Human Life and Thought. Chapman and Hall, London, 1902. Thomas G. West, Vindicating the Founders, Race, Sex, Class, and Justice in the Origins of America. Rowman and Littlefield Publishers, Inc., Lanham, Maryland, 1997. Mao Zedong, Introducing the Communists, Selected Works of Mao Zedong, Marxist Internet Archive. Mao Zedong, The United Front in Cultural Work, Selected Works, October 30, 1944, Volume 3, 236-37, as cited in Mao Zedong, quotations from Mao Zedong to The Mass Line, Marxist Internet Archive. Mao Zedong, Problems of Strategy in China's Revolutionary War, December 1936, Marxist Internet Archive. Mao Zedong, On Practice, On the Relation Between Knowledge and Practice, Between Knowing and Doing, July 1937, Marxist Internet Archive. Stanislaw Zurich, Altiero Spinelli and New Europe, www.historiastuki.com, PL. Translation, Stanislaw Zurich, YouTube. Post, February 23, 2016.